month ago, my neighbor asked me if I could build him a bathroom vanity out of this rough oak board he had laying in his shed for around 10 years. This board has not been kiln dried, it had a few splits and rots, so I knew this was not gonna be a very simple task. The client wanted to leave one live edge and to cut the rest 3 edges straight. The legs were welded and powder coated by the client himself, so I was just responsible for the woodwork. I marked the line where the cut needs to go, then I took the straightest 2x2 I had and used it as a fence for my circular saw to cut one long edge straight. Not an easy task for this cordless saw, but with 2 batteries it managed to do this. Then I had to cut one end 90 degrees. I made a few cuts just to see how much material I actually need to cut. Then I measured the final length and cut another end as well. Next I had to remove the bark. I used a hammer and a putty knife for that. By the way, here's a proof that this has not been kiln dried, otherwise this worm would have not survived. After cleaning most of the bark with a hammer and a knife, I completed the process with a random orbital sander. The next step was to deal with the wormholes. I simply mixed some fine sawdust with some wood glue and covered the holes. I also had to make a shelf out of this thinner board. First, I cut it to its rough dimensions with a circular saw and on my table saw. And then I ran it through the jointer multiple times. The client did not want any of the boards glued, and they were too wide for my thickness planer, so that's why they are just jointed. This means that the opposing planes are not completely coplanar, but the client was aware of that, so no big deal. Milling just this one board produced a full bag of chips. After the shelf board was jointed, I cut it to its final dimensions and test fitted it. Then I sanded it with 150 grit sandpaper and put it aside. The next day I asked my dad to help with jointing this big board for the countertop. It was really heavy, so I would not have managed to properly do this on my own. Again, I couldn't use my small thickness planer for this task, so both planes of the board are just jointed and not totally coplanar with each other. By the way, those black stains on the board are from artillery shell fragments embedded in this oak many years ago, and metal reacts with oak and stains it black. Client was actually well aware of that, because when milling the wood, the sawmill broke their bandsaw blade to those metal shards. After jointing was done, I took some measurements where the holes for the drain and faucet should be drilled, and proceeded with sanding the slab. Next, I removed the rot and bark in multiple spots because I wanted to fill them in with epoxy resin. Then I had to drill some holes in the legs to mount the shelves and the countertop. I made sure the hole diameter is bigger than the bolts, allowing the wood to move when seasons and moisture content changes. When the holes were drilled, I checked if the bolts weren't too long. They were, so I shortened them a bit with an angle grinder. After marking the places for the holes on the shelf, it was time to screw in the threaded inserts. A lot of woodworkers do not use impact driver for driving in the threaded inserts, but I do not see any issues why this could not be done. It worked fine for me. You can actually be very smooth with an impact driver. I guess this just requires some practice. After this, I fitted the shelf into its place to make sure the holes match and checked if all was looking good. After that, it was time to put the bigger threaded inserts into the big slab for the countertop. Same method was used here, just a thicker drill bit and bigger threaded inserts. I also enlarged the holes in the legs again to allow the wood to move. Then I mounted the countertop and everything was looking good. I marked the spots for the faucet and drain holes. I also made this template for both sizes of the holes. This template helps to keep the hole saw in place and helps with the tear out as well. I drilled both holes from the top and finished drilling from the bottom to make sure there is no tear out at the bottom. I test fitted the faucet and it was a nice fit. Now it was time for epoxy. I have never done this before, so it was a bit intimidating at first. The ratio for this epoxy was 1 to 0.27. So my first batch was 51 grams of epoxy with 15 grams of hardener. I mixed it well and started filling in the knots, splits and rots. I had to buy a heat gun for this process, which helped eliminating the bubbles. Also, I had to add more epoxy as it soaked into the wood and stick some painter's tape under the countertop to avoid leaking in some spots. A few days later, I peeled off the tape and started sanding. Sanding the bottom of this countertop was going well because it was well cured already. However, when I tried sanding the top, I realized that epoxy is still too soft. So I brought the piece home to speed up the curing process, because my workshop was just a few degrees above freezing temperature. After a couple more days, I could finally sand all the epoxy, and also fully sand both the countertop and the shelf. Now it was time to apply the finish. I chose Osmo Hard Wax Oil for this purpose. I have never tried this step before, so it was one more new thing to try for me with this project. According to the instructions, for the first coat you should spread the oil with a brush, roller or cloth, and then remove the excess with a cloth. I did exactly that. First I applied the finish on the bottom of the countertop and the shelf, then a few hours later I flipped the pieces and oiled the top surface. The next day I applied the second coat, and as per instructions, this time the excess should not be removed. I gave the finish a couple of days to cure, assembled the vanity to see how it looks, and it was ready to be installed in my client's bathroom. Even though this might seem like a very basic project, I actually learned a few things. So it was a very useful project for me as a DIYer, especially when the client and his wife were happy with the result as well. Thanks for watching this episode and stay tuned for more content on my channel. Cheers!